Sponsored by Cook Unity.
Hello my beautiful watchers, and welcome to my final video on the Chronicles of Narnia. Almost 5 years, 3 lost in adaptations and 3 video book essays after beginning this quest, I have finally come to the end. The Last Battle by C.S. Lewis. Right up until the end, Lewis continued his trend of writing these books fast enough to publish one every year from 1950 to 1956, which means I took almost as long to summarize these books as it took him to create them. I procrastinate. This 7th edition to the Chronicles is almost exclusively told from the perspective of a native human Narnian, a narrative choice shared by only one other book in the series. If this is your first time coming across my videos on this series, it might be beneficial for you to start at the beginning, but the TLDR of the things to keep in mind is C.S. Lewis was big into Christianity when he wrote these books. The character who started out as an allegory for Jesus was eventually revealed to literally be Jesus, who is choosing to look like a lion for his own reasons, and you can buy the merch that I made to capitalize on this development. And finally, despite there being literally no subtext to support it, I adamantly ship Eustace and Prince Caspian. Right, let's synopsisize. This story, like so many countless other classic literature, starts with an ape being a dick to a donkey. Cliché, I know, but there it is. Somewhere along the western border of Narnia, a simian named Shift is spending his days manipulating Puzzle, his dim-witted equine companion, into doing all of his work for him, until one day a lion's skin, discarded by a hunter upstream, washes down the river to them. C.S. Lewis makes sure he spends a good amount of time describing just how difficult it is for Puzzle to retrieve it from under the waterfall, including him nearly drowning, and how mentally abusive Shift is towards him. Shift then turns the skin into a crappy but maybe passable in very bad light line disguise that he forces Puzzle to wear, and browbeats him into agreeing to pretend to be Aslan so Shift can use religious fervor to take over Narnia. We then cut to Tyrion, no relation, the King of Narnia, unbeknownst to him the last King of Narnia, chillaxing in the sunshine with his best friend a unicorn named Jewel, and ruminating on the recent rumors that Aslan has returned. A centaur named Runewit comes galloping up to him to announce that he's been doing some astrology divination, as his kind are wont to do, and the results have been disheartening, to say the least. Tyrion is skeptical, but these portents of doom are almost immediately confirmed when a dryad comes staggering up to them and manages to just get out that hers and her family's trees were being chopped down before dropping dead, as unfortunately Narnian dryads are known to do when their tree is felled. Tyrion is filled with so much kingly wrath he doesn't even wait to gather an army or even a squad before charging off with Jewel to save his subjects, though he does have the brains to ask Runewit to do it and follow them ASAP. When they get to the Western Front, a water rat informs him that Aslan has decreed that all the felled lumber is going to be floated out to sea and sold to the Calormen Empire. As you might remember from The Horse and His Boy, Calormen is a human land heavily based on the Middle East, and it's not great. It's a expansionist empire that thrives on cruelty and slavery. Indeed, Tyrion witnesses a band of Calormen in the process of enslaving a group of talking Narnian horses, which makes him see all kinds of red. Jewel, were these men, you know, armed?
I don't think so, sire.
Ah, yes, I do actually feel pretty bad about that. And now, a quick word about this video's sponsor. Cook Unity is the first chef-to-meal delivery service made up of over 70 chefs who believe that great food should be for everyone. Each week, these award-winning chefs craft hundreds of globally inspired meals with vegetarian and gluten-free options, which is real good for your boy. Cook Unity meals are never frozen, so they arrive fresh, and the menu rotates every week, so there's always something new to try. This week, I've enjoyed duck, rib, and steak meals. Each come with cooking instructions if you want to be all fancy, or microwave instructions if you want to be like me. You can also see which chef has worked on which meal right on the box, so you know exactly who you have to thank for the delicious healthy goodness.
For example, tonight I'm eating grilled grass-fed ribeye steak with roasted broccoli and peewee potatoes, which was made by Brandon Kida from Los Angeles. The subscription is also flexible, so you can pause, skip weeks, or cancel at any time.
And not for nothing, but my meals were delivered in this legit really nice insulated cooler bag, which is a touch I cannot help but appreciate. So go to cookunity.com/noble50 or click the link in the description and use my code noble50 to get 50% off your first order of Cook Unity meals to try them out for yourself. In fact, he's so guilt-ridden over this casual murder, and the possibility that he was thwarting Aslan's will by doing it, he and Jules surrender themselves to the next Kalormen they come across. As I've unfortunately had to comment on in episodes past, speaking as a modern reader, C.S. Lewis's depiction of Asian individuals is, terrible.
Then the dark men came round them in a thick crowd, smelling of garlic and onions, their white eyes flashing dreadfully in their brown faces. They put a rope halter around Jules' neck. They took the king's sword away and tied his hands behind his back. One of the Kalormens, who had a helmet instead of a turban and seemed to be in command, snatched the gold circlet off Tyrion's head and hastily put it away somewhere amongst his clothes.
The book was written in the 40s. Yeah.
But buckle up, my beautiful watchers, because this is barely scratching the surface of the casual racism in this book. Anyways, the unicorn and his king are treated to an audience with Shift, who's been a busy little monkey. He's created an alliance with the Kalormen Empire. Well, actually, it's revealed later that he's been in on one for a while, but the lion skin was just the last thing they needed to make his bid for power. The Kalormen had snuck a military force into Narnia dressed as merchants, which are now mobilized under the expedition leader, Rishta Khan. They also apparently have a sly ginger cat on their side, though it seems like he was just an amoral opportunist who was happening by. At Khan's behest, a very hungover Shift explains to a crowd of gathered animals that Aslan, who is staying in the barn behind him and only coming out at night when the lighting is really bad and insisting that no one look too closely at him, has revealed to him that he is not only the god of Narnia, he is also Tash, the god that they worship in Kalormen. Tashlan, as he will henceforth be known, has decreed that all of the Narnians will have to voluntarily become slaves of the Empire, doing whatever they're naturally good at. The horses will pull the carts, the dwarfs will go and work in the mines, etc, etc. Tyrion, who is apparently the only person in Narnia who isn't gullible as all hell, realizes that this is just a very clever invasion and calls them out for fibbing. So Shift orders that Jewel be taken away and the king be tied to a tree while he figures out what to do with him. While some loyal mice sneak some food and water to him, King Tyrion still gets a bit delirious as the night goes on and starts thinking about all the times that his ancestors were bailed out of their problems by trans-dimensional children, and wishes they would come and do their thing for him as well. He then has a vision of seeing the Pevensies sitting around a table along with Eustace, Jill, and the elderly Diggory and Polly who witnessed Narnia's birth in their youth. Though he can't speak to them, they appear to see him and recognize him as a Narnian before he wakes up. Shortly later, Jill and Eustace return the favor and appear before him and free him from his bonds. Interestingly, it's been over a week since they briefly saw him, because the passage of time in Narnia versus Earth has never given a fuck if it makes sense or not. Tyrion introduces himself properly and marvels at him meeting the people who travelled with his ancestors 200 years before. In a moment of C.S. Lewis self-awareness, the kids mention it does kind of suck that every time they visit Narnia, everyone that they knew and loved has been super dead for quite a while. They're a little confused about how they got there. The plan had been for Peter and Edmund to sneak onto the land that Professor Diggory used to own before he lost his house and it got demolished, and dig up the green and yellow rings from the magician's nephew so they could get to Narnia that way. However, the last thing that Eustace remembers is waiting at the train station for them to return and noticing that their train was coming around the corner awfully fast. They put this confusion aside though so they can deal with the emergency at hand. Tyrion leads them to a Narnian border fort that he keeps stocked with weapons and armor, where in order to do some espionage, they dress in Kalormen chainmail, and well, they,
I have ever kept a few suits of it in readiness, for I never knew when I or my friends might have reason to walk unseen in the Tisrock's land. And look upon this stone bottle. In this there is a juice which, when we have rubbed it on our hands and faces, it will make us brown as Kalormens.
"Oh, hurrah," said Jill. "Disguises! I love disguises!"
Tyrion showed them how to pour out a little of the juice onto their palms and their hands, and then rub it well over their faces and necks, right down to the shoulders, and then on their hands right up to the elbows. He did the same himself. "After this has hardened on us," he said, "we may wash in water and it will not change. Nothing but oil and ashes will make us white Narnians again."
Yep. Narnian blackface.
The book was written in the 40s.
Yeah. I'm not sure it's actually within my power to fully accentuate just how poorly this book is aged. BT dubs, their disguises are useful for like 3 seconds because every time they meet any Kalorman, Tyrion ends up knocking them out or killing them almost immediately. They rescue Jewel and, as an added bonus, manage to get a very ashamed and apologetic puzzle out of the barn. They run into some Kalorman slavers escorting an army of dwarfs south, and after the usual bare minimum attempt at talking, Tyrion starts chopping heads off with his sword, and Eustace manages to off his opponent too. Despite the Earth Kids having killed someone in at least half the books, it still sometimes takes me aback when these 20th century children straight up ice people. Anyways, the dwarven response to their rescue isn't everything they were hoping for. "You're free, Master Dwarves! Now you can join us and fight to liberate Narnia in the name of the real Aslan." "Ah, fuck that! We are sick of this shit! We are sick of Kalormans and white witches and snake witches and holy lands and human kings who are supposed to rule us. We're inventing atheism and, I don't know, libertarianism. Come on lads, let's go home. Dwarfs for dwarfs from now on." Only one loyal dwarf decides to join their group, which is just in time for him to witness a huge winged creature flying overhead, partly made of smoke and partly made of nightmares. It's theorized that the demon god Tash really has been summoned by the Kalorman and is coming to make a personal appearance. An eagle arrives from the Narnian capital of Cair Paravel with a, update for the king.
"Sire, the Kalormans have invaded by sea. A massive fleet carrying a host of soldiers are already here."
"By the lion, what of Cair Paravel?"
"Already taken."
"The Narnian army?"
"Completely wiped out."
"Runewit the centaur?"
"Slain in battle."
"My goldfish Goldie?"
"Eaten by the cat."
"My cat?"
"Choked on the goldfish, sire."
Cool. Cool. Well, I'm gonna go make a heroic last stand. Anyone else want to join me? Heroic last stand? Heroic last stand? Excellent. That's our plans for the weekend, then. Yep, after thousands of years and generations of heroes laying down their lives to protect it, the Kingdom of Narnia is completely destroyed off-page while its king was busy wearing blackface. A somewhat ignoble and anticlimactic end, I have to admit. They return to the fort in order to, return to White Narnians. As mentioned, Tyrion is fully out of ideas, so he suggests to the Earthlings that they return home while he goes and rescues the local Narnians from the Ape's sway, and then head off to die with honor against the Kalorman main host. Eustace and Jill elect to stay and help, so the party make their way back to the stable, just in time to witness Shift, the cat, and the Kalorman attempting to sell everyone on a convoluted story to cover up for not having a donkey line anymore. The only ones brave enough to challenge this and stand up to the Kalormans are the recently liberated atheist dwarfs. Unfortunately, they do this and all subsequent acts of defiance by hurling racial slurs at them.
The book was written in the 40s.
You know, everyone loves the clip of Troy coming back to the room full of chaos, but I'm certainly getting a lot of mileage out of this one. Anyways, the baddie's plan was to insist that Taslan isn't willing to come outside anymore, but anyone can go and visit him inside the stable if they don't mind facing his hungry lion judgment. Then they have the cat go inside and pretend to have a nice chat with the multi-god, and secretly kill anyone else who attempts it. This plan does not go as intended, however, as the cat comes running out of the stable, so terrified it has apparently devolved into a non-talking animal and runs away forever. The character best described as the one good Kalorman then enters the story. A young officer insists on going into the stable next to meet his god, over to Khan's objections, and appears at first to meet an equally terrible fate. Khan, until this point not really a believer, starts to realize that he has fucked up, and tries to start throwing random animals through the stable door as sacrifices to Tash, but King Leroy Jenkins has once again stood still for as long as he's able and charges in. Unfortunately, once again, his hopes that the animals of Narnia would rally to his side proves to be way too optimistic, as most of them just hang back or run away. It's worth noting that the majority of the very few who do come to his aid are dogs, because they are the goodest boys in any dimension. The heroes make a valiant effort and even drive to Khan's men back at first, and manage to throw Shift through the door to take his own medicine, but things get pretty dire when the Kalorman reinforcements arrive. There's then this unintentionally hilarious moment when all of the talking horses of Narnia come galloping over the top of the hill to save the king. and then the dwarfs decide that they're just going to attack both sides and completely wipe the newcomers out with arrows. I know it was meant to be this big tragic thing, but imagine if the riders of Rohan were making their big heroic charge into Helm's Deep and the music was swelling and then they just got absolutely wrecked by archers. All the Narnians can do is curse at the dwarves, but the Calormen take being shot at rather personally, and murder almost all of them, leaving only 11 survivors who are bound and thrown through the stable door, because that's just what you do to people you don't like now. FYI, if the number of surviving dwarfs was a reference to Snow White, Lewis doesn't do anything to drive that point home. The Narnians continue to fight a losing battle, and they are one by one killed or pushed into the stable until only Tyrion remains, deciding to take at least Khan with him by dragging him through the door. Once inside, he realizes he's not inside at all, but in a beautiful field, standing before Aslan himself, the full set of Pevensey kids and friends looking fabulous in super fashionable Narnian duds, and Tash, the most horrifying monster imaginable. Tash is allowed to grab naughty boy Khan before Aslan tells him to bugger off, and Tyrion introduces himself to the rest of the gang. It is here that we touch upon the single most controversial thing in the entire Chronicles of Narnia. You know, besides the racism, which we just don't talk about.
"Sir," said Tyrion when he had greeted all of these, "if I've read the Chronicles aright, there should be another. Has not your majesty 2 sisters? Where is Queen Susan?" "My sister Susan," answered Peter shortly and gravely, "is no longer a friend of Narnia." "Yes," said Eustace, "and whenever you've tried to get her to come and talk about Narnia, or do anything about Narnia, she says, 'What wonderful memories you have! Fancy, you're still thinking about all those funny games we used to play when we were children.'" "Oh, Susan," said Jill. "She's interested in nothing nowadays except nylons and lipsticks and invitations. She always was a jolly sight too keen on being grown up." "Grown up indeed," said Lady Polly. "I wish she would grow up. She wasted all of her school time waiting to be the age she is now, and she'll waste all the rest of her life trying to stay that age. Her whole idea is to race into the silliest time of one's life as quickly as she can, and then stop there as long as she can." "Well, we don't have to talk about that now," said Peter. "Look, here are lovely fruit trees. Let us taste them." So to summarise, Susan, who I believe is about 21 at this point, has convinced herself that all of their adventures in Narnia were imaginary, so she can focus on having a social life. As a result, she didn't go on the rings heist, wasn't on the train, and isn't here in Narnia now, and doesn't show up for the rest of the book either. We shall come back to this. Let's face it, it is somewhat inconceivable to attempt a discussion of this book without coming back to this. Anyways, Peter mentions that the last thing that he remembers was feeling a big old jolt on the train before he ended up here, and mentions that by pure coincidence, he was pretty sure that the Pevensey parents were on that train as well, but once again, they put this mystery aside for later. BT dubs, it's also mentioned that Shift the Ape was eaten by Tash, which everyone agrees is a good thing, because fuck that asshole. Speaking of comeuppance, the 11 dwarfs that were thrown through the door are nearby, but all they can see and feel is the dingy-ass stable that everyone was expecting. Aslan can summon up all sorts of fine foods and wines for them, but they still perceive it as straw and rotten turnips and other barn-related things. Aslan implies that this purgatory is self-inflicted and is a result of their lack of faith. They chose cunning instead of belief, so they get to rot in an imaginary barn for all of eternity, I guess. A tad harsh, but they were kind of racist and they did shoot a ton of innocent animals, so fuck them. Aslan then goes back out through the stable door to Narnia and starts yelling, "Time! Time! Time!" And by time he means it's time for the end of the world, baby! All the creatures of Narnia come running up to Aslan and are presumably divided up between the sinful and the pure, as half get to go through the stable door while the other half devolve into regular animals and run back into the ending world. There is no mention of any humans though, so I guess fuck the Arklanders and Telmarines. Then yeah, it's Apocalypse Central. The extra giant called Father Time wakes up and starts wrecking shit. The stars fall out of the sky, the sun goes supernova before being squished by Father Time, dragons tear up the forests, the mountains fall and the seas rise. Bye-bye Narnia. Back through the stable door in the still perfectly lovely world, the goop comes across the #NotAllCalormen guy, who it turns out is okay after all, but is now regretting his choice of deity. Fortunately, Aslan explains that it's all Gucci. "It is false. Not because he and I are one, but because we are opposites. I take to me these services which thou hast done for him. For I and he are of such different kinds that no service which is vile can be done to me, and none which is not vile can be done to him. Therefore, if any man swears by Tash and keeps his oath for the oath's sake, then it is by me that he is truly sworn, though he know it not, and it is I who reward him. And if any man do a cruelty in my name, then though he says the name Aslan, it is Tash whom he serves, and by Tash his deed is accepted. Dost thou understand, child?
Yeah, even though he was fantasy Islamic, because he was doing good things, he was actually fantasy Christian all along. Considering the fate of the atheist dwarfs, I guess this means that an opposing religion is still better than no religion at all. And I am not going to lie to you guys, this is the point where the plot gets really weird, even by the Chronicles of Narnia standards. First of all, everyone realizes that they can't feel fear, even if they try to, and they can't get tired, so they use this new superpower to run like crazy into the west to explore this new world, until they come to some golden gates on a mountaintop where they meet, well, everyone. Everyone who has ever featured in a book is there. Reapercheap, Mr. Tumnus, Caspian, who I'm sure Eustace was very pleased to see, Truffle Hunter the Badger, the cab driver and his wife who became the Adam and Eve characters in The Magician's Nephew. Everyone. So you might be thinking, oh, this is obviously Aslan's country from the Voyage of the Dawn Treader and the Silver Chair, but surprisingly no, for in the distance they see an unconquered and much nicer looking Cair Paravel. They're actually in Narnia Plus, or Narnia Premium. Red Narnia. It's better Narnia for paid subscribers. The general idea that they try to get across in universe is Narnia is like a physics-defying onion. There's layers of Narnia inside Narnia, and each new Narnia is actually bigger and better than the one before. Also, apparently this version of Narnia is physically connected to the upgraded version of our world too, as they can see a better England in the distance with the professor's not demolished house still there. So while it's confusing to me, it does appear to be quite a happy ending, so Lucy, who is used to how these adventures go by now, starts preparing herself.
Why do you look sad, my child?
Well, the quest is over. This is usually the point where you send us home, Aslan.
Oh, you don't need to worry about that. You and your entire family, except for Susan, are dead as the dodo. This is your afterlife.
What?
Yes, indeed. The jolt you all felt on the train was it making a spectacular high-speed crash, killing everyone on board and everyone at the station.
Yeah! Woohoo! Yeah! Alright! Woo!
Yay! Death!
And that, my beautiful watchers, is basically the end. It's hinted that Aslan then transforms into regular Jesus, and it's explained that everything the kids had done in their world or regular Narnia was nothing compared to the eternal adventure they're about to embark on now. It's even written that they lived happily ever after, which is a bit of a well-actually moment if ever there was one. So yeah, every hero who has ever appeared in these books goes off to enjoy the most unimaginably amazing existence ever for all eternity. Everyone except for Susan. Nope, not Susan, because she liked nylons and lipstick and invitations. That is a problem that we should talk about. Despite everything that she had done for Narnia in the past, Susan did not get to go to what is, for all intents and purposes, heaven, because she started believing it wasn't real and became a bit of a socialite. Over the years, this plot point has become known as the problem of Susan amongst fans of the books. Bear with me, my beautiful watchers, because while it may seem at first glance to be the most batshit insane, unnecessarily dark as fuck ending for a character imaginable, and I'm not necessarily disagreeing with you, there's quite a lot more to it than that. Now you might be wondering, how on earth did Susan manage to convince herself that Narnia didn't exist when she spent 15 years helping to rule it? But you have to keep in mind that these books have been consistently clear on the fact that that whole thing did not have any lasting psychological effects on the kids, a plot point the movies diverged on that I brought up in my Lost in Adaptation episodes. I don't know if this makes it better or worse, but Lewis claimed that this was not a last-minute decision, and this was the ending planned out for Susan all along, referencing several occasions where Susan had denied feeling Aslan's presence or displayed more grown-up tendencies than the other children. And that does seem to be the big sin that Lewis is ascribing to her, the key character flaw that led to her loss of faith. Wanting to grow up was the crime he sentenced Susan for. It's easy to read a misogynistic overtone into the condemnation of lipstick and nylons, and that might well have been a factor, but look at how much more time he spends on the rant that Polly goes on immediately afterwards about Susan frittering away her youth and wanting to be older. There is some hope though. After the series' completion, one addendum that Lewis consistently stuck to right up until his death was that he never intended for Susan to be definitively kept out of heaven forever. She would have every chance to realize her mistake and every opportunity to find her faith in furry Jesus or regular Jesus again before she died. BT Dubs, say what you like about C.S. Lewis, he spent enough time responding to children's fan mail to fill volumes of books, and it looks like he actively encouraged young writers by giving them permission to write fanfiction of his IP. Because of this attitude, it's been theorized that Susan's ending represented a little bit of a author insert situation, as Lewis apparently also lost his faith in his early life and didn't get back into the whole church thing until he was in his 30s. So, the problem of Susan solved? Potentially just a delay on the road to heaven, not a roadblock, ultimately no harm done? Unfortunately, no, we are just getting started. In 2019, author Neil Gaiman helped put words to some unaddressed issues when he weighed in on the subject in the opening short story of his graphic novel The Problem of Susan and Other Things. His comic follows the last days of a Professor Hastings, who it's heavily implied was either the IRL Susan that C.S. Lewis wrote about, or a woman whose early life was so similar she's a reliable stand-in for her. Gaiman drew attention to the fact that Susan's life was probably not going to provide a lot of opportunities for reflection and rediscovery of the innocence of youth she had so shamefully rejected and the faith she owed so much to. And it almost certainly wasn't going to involve a lot of nylons and lipstick either, because her life was going to be hell on earth. Getting over losing her entire family at such a young age alone was going to be a much bigger issue for her to deal with, and you have to keep in mind she's now all alone in a time period that didn't allow for excessive independence for women. I mean, she's not even going to be able to open her own bank account. He even highlighted the trauma she must have gone through having to identify the bodies of her siblings and parents after the crash. Another point that Gaiman brings up is how disproportionate the punishment seems to be compared to the crime, and rightly so. One of the problems that The Problem of Susan inadvertently highlights is a very common, very real critique of Christianity's teachings, i.e., what kind of all-powerful God, who we are told loves us like a father, would be so insecure he would damn someone for eternity simply for not believing in him. All that said though, I do have to mention that Gaiman's book also includes a nightmare about an anthropomorphic Aslan devouring the Pevensey children right before having public sex with the White Witch, and an unpublished Pamela Lyndon Travers book in which it's revealed that God did not create and is slightly afraid of Mary Poppins, because Neil Gaiman is always going to Neil Gaiman. Now, I personally, and I stress that word because we're well into subjective territory here, I personally think it's up to interpretation if Aslan had caused all of the true believers to be on the crashing train so they could receive their eternal reward, or it had simply been a genuine unfortunate accident and he was just accepting them into heaven as a result. That really comes down to how much you believe God's will rules over everyone's lives, which digresses into this whole debate about free will that I just cannot get into right now. But assuming he was not the instigator of their deaths, assuming that there is some room in Christianity, allegorical or otherwise, for humans to choose their own path in life, then Aslan didn't exactly deny heaven to Susan, she denied it to herself by turning her back on Narnia and not going with her family when Narnia called for aid. Aslan couldn't force her to go on the trip, and he can't just kill her so she's not left behind. As much as it sucks, Aslan had to let Susan make her own mistakes. It really sucks that the consequences were so massive, but that's life sometimes. Incidentally, I know it's weird saying not dying was the punishment, but remember we're talking about getting to live in a wonderland of superpowers and great food forever. So, is the problem of Susan solved now? No! There is still stuff to talk about. Because, while there might be some wriggle room regarding if Aslan had treated Susan like absolute shit, there is no way to deny that C.S. Lewis did. I mean, the most obvious first, none of it needed to happen, and any argument that it did would be, as Dan Olson would describe it, a Tholian argument. Even taking that into account, Susan's absence is in no way required or even relevant to the plot of the book. It's an absolutely superfluous twist, making all of the before-mentioned horrible implications for her so much crueler. There's also the issue of just how dismissive the old git was towards Susan. The excerpt I read before, the half paragraph of her friends and family being judgmental about her life choices, was the entirety of Susan's part in this last book. Now, to be fair to her family, this moment occurred before they knew that they were dead, and the book ends pretty much immediately after Aslan spills the beans, so we cannot know for sure that their first words weren't, "Wait, shit, what about Susan? Are we never gonna see her again? Fuck you, Lion!" But again, these in-universe defenses for the characters don't let C.S. Lewis himself off the hook. He could very easily have kept the narrative going for a few seconds longer so we could get a clear indication that he gave any kind of a flying fart about Susan Pevensey. While Susan was consistently the least developed Pevensey kid, she was still a major character in 2 books, one of which was by far the most popular of the whole series. She meant something to people. When my siblings and I were very young, we played Narnia games, and my big sister often played Susan, so this sheer lack of interest that Lewis seems to be displaying towards her is upsetting. The most ironic thing about the problem of Susan is, despite Lewis condemning her as a silly, conceited young woman, Susan and her failings are most definitely not the one with a problem. Christianity potentially has a problem with contradictory teachings, Aslan might have a problem with the scope of control he has over people, the other Pevensies could have a problem with supreme self-absorption, and C.S. Lewis certainly has a problem with either a lack of empathy towards his own creation or a failure to get his meaning across in his writing. But Susan's only crime was going through the same confusion and search for identity that all human beings go through at her age, and she deserved better. Right, sorry about that. I do have other things to say about this book besides justice for Susan. In fact, cards on the table, Susan's fate wasn't even what put me off this book as a kid. I was told Susan bad, and my easily led child brain just accepted Susan bad. No, what bothered me, even though I didn't have the words for it back then, was it felt like such a narratively unsatisfying ending. Now, I realize that a book about the end of a world has to involve some level of loss, but did the heroes have to go out on such a spectacular L? Narnia as a kingdom is just absolutely smooshed. They're basically bailed out of complete subjugation by the apocalypse. And I just don't love it. Doesn't matter if you eventually completely drop the ball in life, because heaven will still be nice as a message. Like, am I alone in thinking that one last victory would have been a much more gratifying thing to go out on than the final defeat? I just feel like it sucks that Narnia went out on a whimper, not a bang. Now, you could potentially see it as a sort of Kobayashi Maru kind of test, you know. It is a win to never give up, even when victory is impossible and death is certain, but most of Narnia doesn't even rise to that occasion. In his heroic last stand, Tyrion is heartbroken that he's abandoned by most of his subjects besides a few wild creatures and the good dogs, leaving him to, as far as they knew, die alone outside a stable. The Narnia he couldn't save almost doesn't seem worth saving. Tangent warning, but it also made me wonder why this hadn't happened centuries ago. It was specifically mentioned in The Horse and His Boy, which takes place during the golden years of High King Peter's reign, that the only reason the Calorman Empire hadn't invaded Narnia yet is they couldn't reach it by land because of a really big desert, and the Narnians had a really good navy that could hold them off at sea. However, it's also noted in the Voyage of the Dawn Treader that even that mighty ship paled in comparison to the ships that Narnia used to have, and its navy wasn't much to speak of anymore. So, why did the racist stereotypes wait until the end of the world to take what they could obviously have taken at any time? I know. Ooh, well done, Dom. You found a plot hole in a children's book series. I just like fantasy geopolitics, okay? I'm that sort of nerd. Anyways, getting back to why I never liked this book, even as a kid and even ignoring the problem of Susan, I remember thinking it was fucked up that the happy ending involved all of the Pevensey kids dying super young. Yes, it does work out pretty well for them in the long run, but couldn't coming to Deluxe Narnia have waited until they died of old age after long, happy lives on Earth? Why rush them into heaven, C.S. Lewis? Speaking of short lifespans, because the characters are always dropping exact figures about how long it's been between books, we actually know exactly how long Narnia existed for, and the answer might surprise you. In Narnian time, it was 2,555 years from the creation of the world to its destruction. In Earth years, 49. Even leaving aside the relative lifespan, even within Narnia, that seems like a shockingly short amount of time for a world to exist. So, in conclusion, you know, I can't actually remember if I've said this before, but, and this is one of my potentially hotter takes, I am of the opinion that C.S. Lewis peaked very heavily at The Lion, the Witch and the Wardrobe, and no subsequent book in the series came close to recapturing its magic. One positive thing I will say for this book though, its cover fucks surprisingly hard. You know, I've always been aware that unicorns have horns, but you don't often think about them actually shanking a bitch with them, you know? Props to Lewis for that. Thank you for joining me, my beautiful watchers. By the way, I lied about this being my last foray into the world of Narnia for dramatic effect. Obviously, I'm going to cover the Netflix adaptations when they're finally done. I hear Greta Gerwig has been tapped to write and direct the first two, so that is promising. Please don't forget to like this video, share it with your friends, and leave a comment, so the hungry monster that is the YouTube algorithm doesn't devour my channel, and I have to get a job at the Renaissance Fair being that awkward guy who tries to remind people about health and safety without breaking character. Ho, my lords and ladies, forget not that the sun beats heavily upon us, and one must top up one's protective ointments regularly. And remember, though thou may be brave of heart, thou must also be hydrated of body on thy quest. Huzzah! I used to be a YouTuber, you know. Nobody cares, Dom, or they would have liked, shared, subscribed, and commented when they had the chance. Yeah, I guess that's right.
Much love and appreciation to my patrons of honor, April Mack, Shelby Holtz, and Curtis Charles Jr. And a big thank you to this video's editor, Sophia Ricciardi. Links to her work in the video description.
Last King of Narnia. I mentioned ginger cats and soteria peers. That's... fate? You wouldn't side against Narnia with the Clawmans, would you, budgie? And murder almost all of them, leaving only 11 survivors. Why am I holding up 2? It's 1 and 1.